Can the Prime Minister confirm that the instruction has been given to federal employees to ignore these 200,000 applications as being flagged as potentially fraudulent?
Yes, there will be things we need to clean up after the fact and work to fix, but getting that help into Canadians' pockets during this pandemic was our priority.
Will he at least then commit to investigating every individual case of fraud, or will he write it off as the story is said?
We made a decision as a country that we would be there for them, and that has been and will continue to be our priority.
Back to Mr. Elbis.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can leave the cottage talk for the cottage. We're asking a very simple question here. Will he commit as a government to enforce the rule of law?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
When we made the determination that we needed to move quickly to help Canadians, we knew that there would be a need to clean up after the fact, to go after fraudulent cases, and we will do that.
Hi there, I'm Vashi Capellos. This is Power and Politics on CBC News Network. We're coming to you right around the world. You can access us on the CBC News app as well as on our website, CBCNews.ca. A warm welcome to viewers joining us on their local stations in the Maritime provinces. It's great, as always, to have you with us. You heard there the Prime Minister being grilled today over reports public servants were advised to ignore obvious fraudulent claims for the emergency benefit. 200,000 claims have been red flagged, according to the National Post, but employees are not being told to stop payments or trigger investigations. So will the Prime Minister's explanation that speed trumps need fly with Canadians? The Power Panel is here to weigh in. Supriya Dwivedi, host of The Morning Show, Global News Radio 640 Toronto, joins us from that city. Over in Ottawa, political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin, and Rachel Curran, I believe, also in Ottawa, I think, former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, now a Senior Associate with Harper and Associates. Hi, everyone. Great to see you.
Hey, I'm in Gatineau.
Gatineau. My apologies. My goodness. That's the problem when you just rely on a teleprompter, right? My apologies also in advance if I have to interrupt you to head to Alberta. But I do want to look at this question that we heard in the House today, or virtually in the House today, around the possibility of fraud and how the federal government will go about tackling it. Supriya, the feds so far seem to be saying this is something we're going to deal with after. The questions were directed, obviously, based on that National Post piece today, talking about that there could be as many as 200,000 people with fraudulent claims.
Yeah, and that's obviously a worrying number, right? 200,000 is certainly not anything to sneeze at, but this also isn't necessarily new. This isn't a new story. Like back in April, the Toronto Star ran a similar story about how the government's priority right now was to get money into the hands of people that absolutely need it. And, you know, looking at the employment data that has been coming out, or the unemployment data, rather, I should say, that's been coming out, has been, you know, incredibly stark and worrying. So I understand that there are people that are concerned about people that are committing fraud and aren't doing this in earnest. I know that there's, in the National Post story that you're referring to, there's, I guess, an example of inmates in prison in Trois-Rivières that are apparently getting CERB checks, and that's obviously ludicrous. But I think people also need to keep in mind that there's no, you know, magic doomsday clock that we're up against. The government will have plenty of time to go after people. And just to give people a sense, I was really paranoid about this when I was on maternity leave. And I remember looking this up when you're getting EI payments, and you owe 150% of any overpayment for a benefit. And depending on which is lower, you would owe 3 times any payment of benefit received for every false statement made. So it's not as though people are just going to get away with this.
Yeah, and I think, Rachel, that's what the Prime Minister and the Employment Minister have been saying. The problem today was that the Prime Minister was getting some pretty direct questions about whether or not he had attached his own name to that directive or to that memo, and he didn't respond with a specific answer. He didn't give an answer. So it almost gave the story a bit more oxygen, I guess.
Yeah, I think it sends a terrible signal. I mean, look, I hear Supriya saying the government will have time to go after people, you know, when this is over. Realistically, they're going to have a tremendous amount of trouble collecting from people who are claiming this benefit fraudulently. Look, I think it's a very small percentage. I don't think there's a large number of Canadians who are out there deliberately committing fraud. But for those who are, collecting that money back from them is not going to be easy. Collecting that money back from an inmate in a prison is going to be very difficult. And
how are they cashing that check, though?
Well, I think it sends a terrible signal for the government to say to public servants, overlook, turn a blind eye to fraud, to people that you know are claiming this improperly. We'll deal with it after the fact. But even if you know something is wrong right up front, just ignore it. I think that sends just a terrible signal through the system. And in fact, it probably encourages fraud that may not have happened otherwise. I understand that there's not time to do complete due diligence on this. The government does need to get money out the door quickly, and they've done a good job of that. But there has to be some basic boundaries that are set, and I would think that turning down clearly fraudulent applications would be one of them.
Yeah, I see two things here, Françoise. First of all, I see the need to get the money out the door. And I think for me, the people I hear from are people who are very concerned about, do I qualify for this? Can I access the money? And, you know, they really need help. So I see that point. I also see the point that, explicitly saying, do not stop pay is a whole other level that I understand how that, again, gives sort of some weight or some oxygen to the discussion.
And it was actually the base of the questioning from Mr. Albus. And it was, I was watching and I was in awe to see the 50 shades of, I don't want to answer your question. And it was kind of an easy question. Did the Prime Minister or his minister sign off on that memo? It's either yes or no. It's not, well, we want the money to reach Canadian. It can be, yes, we did sign off or we were aware of it. And when we balance both sides, we decided that was a choice we were able to live with, for the sole reason that there were millions of people who would benefit. And yes, there might be hundreds of thousands that will get into the crack. Some of them we will be able to recoup. Others, we know that we will not see the color of that money. Or you say, no, we're not aware, we don't agree with that way of doing things, or whatever. So this whole exchange between the Prime Minister and MP Albus was absolutely airy. It was fantastic to see how it just gives, it continues the story, in my opinion, because the Conservatives or any other party worth being in the opposition will want to know exactly what's happening, who's dealing here. And remember, at the beginning of the program, you had MPs, Liberal MPs, saying to people, ask for it anyway. So it kind of sent a signal, a bit of free for all, and it's a bit at the example of all these new programs that the government keep trickling down, one press conference after one press conference, and at the end of the whole ordeal, it's going to be pretty fascinating to see what will be the balance, the end of all this, and what we're in as all Canadians for all these programs. But it would have been much easier to answer something else for the Prime Minister.
I apologize. I do have to interrupt. Speaking of press conferences, I hope you guys will wait for a few moments as we head over to Edmonton. Thank you to all three of you for your patience. Supriya, I was listening to Dr. Hinshaw there, and actually it's funny because it jumped out at me, all these questions about the experience of other jurisdictions and reopening the economy there. And what it shows you, or at least what she seemed to explain, was it's different everywhere, but there is some form of this that we're going to be dealing with for a long time. And I wonder, beyond just the politics that we've been discussing about this stuff, what the implications are for the government as we move out of the phase in which these kinds of payments, the CERB or the wage, whatever it is being paid out. Like, we're already into month 3, people are applying for. There's only 4 months. They're going to have to assess what they continue with. The deficit's already $250 billion, apparently. Those decisions are not going to be small ones.
They're not going to be small, and they're certainly not going to be, at least looking at the numbers side of things, going to be particularly easy. On the one hand, you want to make sure that everybody's taken care of during this time, and I certainly understand that. But on the other hand, you can't keep up just racking bills and bills and bills, because eventually, something's got to give, right? But the reality is that until there is a vaccine or some sort of effective therapy or treatment for this, we will likely be doing some sort of physical distancing and some sort of intermittent shutdown as we see, spikes in outbreaks. And that's why I think it's really important for people to adhere to a lot of the guidance that we've been getting from our public health authorities. Hand hygiene and staying away from people are still the two top things that anyone can be doing. And even as economies, start to open up across the country, we still can't forget that this virus is bested by soap. And so it's we are, and we need to keep that in mind, that washing our hands and not touching our faces, and when we can't physically distance, to wear a mask if you can, then that's the sort of things that we should be doing.
Yeah, that stuff is not going to go away. Rachel, as far as the government in this sort of mid phase goes, like how much financial support? It's not going to be forever. They can't keep up this level forever.
No, and this is where it gets dangerous politically, I think, for the government. We are, and Sabria's right, we're going to be dealing with this sort of health crisis for a while yet, but we are now moving into figuring out how to reopen the economy, and how do we get things up and running, even on a limited basis again. We can't remain in lockdown for weeks and weeks and months at a time. So this sort of exercise of figuring out what can open, how quickly it can reopen, what kind of support people are going to get as that happens, particularly if their jobs don't return or if they're still working limited hours. The government can't provide these benefits indefinitely. I think the Prime Minister said today, the government will be here for you as you need it, when you need it, or something like that. It's not realistic. We just can't actually afford to keep paying people $2,000 a month indefinitely. So this, I think, is where it gets dangerous. The government is going to have to outline a plan to reopen the economy slowly, but it's also going to have to talk about what it's going to do for all of those people who remain unemployed or underemployed or can't go back to work. And how it's going to support the population through that much longer period of time.
Françoise, last word to you.
Well, the thing I would add is that it's fine and dandy to talk about reopening, and I'm all for that. But at the same time, we still have big question mark. How will our lives react after this, in a sense that will there be a second wave, a third wave? Will they be worse than the first one? If so, with all the measures the government trickled down to pretty much every aspect of society, what will happen to those in need at that point in time if it happens? Because remember, we're all confined so that we don't kill our health system that would have not been able to sustain more than pretty much what it had in the seniors' home, but also in the hospitals if we hadn't confined ourselves. That's our saving grace, if you permit me to say that, in a sense that by obeying to the orders, we probably make things a bit better. So there's still a lot of question mark. I hope that we don't go to discotheque like they did in Germany, because that's the sure way to not be social distancing, and do things progressively so that we can ease out as much as we can in a smooth fashion. That is my only wish, so that we didn't do all this for nothing.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. Supriya Dwivedi, Françoise Boivin, and Rachel Curran. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.